Now, the latest set of economic statistics from India disclosed that in the year to March, the economy was only growing at a rate of 8.5%, slightly below expectations. Oh, to have underachievement problems like that. India, we are repeatedly told, is one of the great success stories in modern times, an emerging power, and we are also repeatedly told the world's biggest democracy to boot. Not according to the Booker Prize-winning novelist Arundhati Roy. She claims tens of thousands of the country's poorest people have been killed, hundreds of thousands tortured by corrupt governments, bought and sold by big corporations. It's the second fastest growing economy in the world, generating a burgeoning middle class and a consumer society to match those in the West. It even has a space program. But this rising tide has not lifted all ships. Removed from their land to make way for India's new industries, these indigenous peoples in the east of the country scrape a living scavenging bits of coal for $1 a day. And there's conflict. Maoist insurgents have been waging war against the forces of capitalism for almost 50 years. They say they want to protect the land rights of India's Aboriginal peoples. 6,000 have died, but they have an unlikely ally. World famous for her novel, The God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy wants to use her prestige to champion their cause and to attack the Western model of capitalism. In 1999, she fought against the construction of the Narmada Dam, saying it would displace 500,000 people. But is she in a fight she can't win? In 2013, India's growth rate is set to overtake that of China. Is that pace resistible by anyone? And Arundhati Roy is here. This enormous change, the emergence on the world stage of a power, the like of which has never been seen before, a voice that's never been heard before, aren't you proud of that? It's
a false voice. It's a lie.
Why?
And I'm not proud of it at all, because in the 90s, in the early 90s, when the economy began to open and the growth rate began to gallop, since then, if you look at what it has done to the mass of people in India, yes, we have, I think, the world's largest number of millionaires or billionaires, but we have 800 million people living on less than 20 rupees, which is about 30 cents a day. You have millions of displaced people. You have more poor people in India than the poorest countries in Africa put together.
The claim is that poverty has been halved in the last 30 years.
It's untrue. You know, it's untrue, and you go and have a look at what's going on there. There's an insurrection in the country. Why
in
it isn't
of the country?
In vast parts of the country, which is out of control of the government now. They are deploying, you know, paramilitary forces in central India. The government just can't even go into big territories, and now that's spilling outside the forests as well, because this growth rate is built on taking land from the poor.
This collection of essays of yours, Broken Republic, features particularly the campaign being fought in part of India where you say the land is going to be appropriated if it isn't resisted for the extraction of bauxite, which is necessary in the production of aluminium. Now, are you suggesting that all natural resources just be left as they are in the hands of indigenous people?
Well, it's not that simple, you know, but if you look at the map of India today, the forests, the indigenous people, the minerals, the Maoists, they're all sort of stacked one on top of the other, you know. And there is this huge program. It's not just of extracting minerals, but it's of building dams and infrastructure. It's displacing millions of people for this, and it's not even as though that bauxite, for example, which is worth some $4 trillion in the state of Orissa, or iron ore, it's not even as though those minerals are going to be used for the good of the people of India. They are being sold to corporations who pay a tiny royalty to the government of India. and the minerals are taken out and traded.
But I mean, you end this book. We have to ask our rulers, can you leave the water in the rivers, the trees in the forest, can you leave the bauxite in the mountain? If they say they cannot, then perhaps they should stop preaching morality to the victims of their wars.
See, because I think this is a profound question that it doesn't just concern India. It concerns the entire question of what we think of as civilization. And the reason that I ask it is that everybody knows that the planet is in a crisis right now. So you have in India a community of close to 100 million Adivasi or indigenous people. They are not, I'm not suggesting that, you know, everybody goes back to living with loincloths and bows and arrows. However, we have to redefine the meaning of modernity, to redefine the meaning of happiness. For example, you take the bauxite. It's a very good example. Bauxite in the mountain makes the mountain a porous reservoir which holds water, which irrigates the plains. You take the bauxite out of the mountain for what? To make aluminium for what? You know, the people who live there don't want that aluminium. So the question really is, are we ever going to be able to look at something without thinking of it as a resource to feed the kind of capitalism that is leading the planet to a crisis?
Is there any country in the world, you may perhaps reject the idea of nation states, I don't know, but is there any country in the world whose practices you admire in this regard?
Well, I do reject the idea of the nation state, and I think that what has happened in India, I keep saying the most successful secessionist struggle in India has been the secession of the middle and upper classes into outer space, from where they look down and at the indigenous people, at the poor, and say, what's our bauxite doing in your mountains? You know, what's our water doing in your rivers? And the thing is that in India, there are vast parts of India where there is a different imagination, where there is the possibility of a different kind of modernity. And that is what the government seeks to annihilate. Now they're actually planning to deploy the army to fight the poorest people in this country, and we call it a democracy. Well,
that's because there's been an insurgency going on there for 50 years.
But that insurgency consists of Adivasi people, indigenous people who have been marginalized. And if you look at the Indian Constitution, you ask me, if you ask me on the show, what should the government do? I would say the government should honor its own constitution. It is the government that vandalizes its constitution against constitutional law to take away land from indigenous people. And it's the rebels, including the Maoists, from the Maoists to the Gandhians, who are fighting to have the constitution implemented, and it's the government that's vandalizing it.
I've got to ask you one other thing while you're here. It's been a long time since The God of Small Things, since when you've basically produced non-fiction. Are you writing another novel?
I'm trying to. I'm trying to.
Is there any end in sight?
Well, you know, I mean, unfortunately, one is living in a situation of such urgency, such emergency. There are hundreds of people in jail, there are people being killed all the time. It's like a civil war there, you know, and for me, it's very hard to just take a sort of careerist position, you know, and say, oh, I must write my next novel. I would love to, but it's not entirely in my hands what's going on there.
Thank you very much.